Hey, welcome to MentorMe, another episode of the interviews that I do with various people here for the Small Church Pastors Coaching Program. I am excited to have with me today Reverend Steve Stetler, who is, he's currently employed with Hope International Missions as their Director of Member Care, caring for and increasing the resilience and support of missionaries around the world. He has been a missionary in Mexico with Bible Methodist Missions for years. I think 12. Is it 12 years? 10 years. And then was so part of that time he lived right on the border on the American side due to some violence and things. And then part of that time he lived down in Mexico for several years in Saltillo. And he has been just an assistant pastor, a senior pastor for years. I think you're coming up on how many years of ministry?
In about 2 weeks, it will be 38 years.
38 years, okay. So a lot of experience, a wide range of experience. This particular interview, I want to focus in on a particular topic, and that is to talk about cross-cultural ministry. And if you serve in a city in America, you have noticed the differences in culture. You've noticed that there's differences in particular neighborhoods where you drive from one place to the next place and things change. The way things are kept up change, the colors of houses change, the way they keep their cars changes. Everything shifts from one neighborhood to the next. And that can be a result of African American neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, white, middle class, lower class, upper class. Here's the thing. Barriers of culture can keep you from really, the gospel from really penetrating your neighborhood. I personally know churches that have had to shut down because they couldn't make the leap. I also know churches that hung on forever because small churches have 9 lives and they last forever, but they didn't really make the impact they should have made in their community. So today we're here to talk about bridging those gaps and getting across those. Steve, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
I'm glad to be here.
I want to begin by just asking, when we talk about cross-cultural ministry, let's start by defining some terms. What do we mean when we talk about culture and how to reach a cross-cultural barriers? What is the culture that we're talking about?
Well, every people group has a culture. That is the color of life. That is the activities. That is the value system. The perspective on everything from people and women and children and laws and government. All of that comes together and forms the basis for who we are, how we feel, how we interact, what we believe, how we participate socially, and of course a very important part of that is religiously as well. So it is something that is unique to every group and of people in every country of the world. And you take a melting pot like the United States, well, you have culture in general, but then you have all these subcultural things even within a basic culture. So right. It becomes very complex, but it's so important that we have some understanding of culture if we're ever going to minister within our own culture, let alone cross-culturally.
Right. Culture is asking a human to define their culture is a little bit like asking a fish to define water.
Yes.
Because it almost disappears to us.
Yes.
We don't see our culture.
Yes.
We're not even aware. We just think this is the way things
yes.
are, and this is what really is real and truth. So in the church world, your denomination, you most likely, you see cultural differences when you go to someone else's culture, and they see cultural difference when they come to yours. You don't see it you don't see your own culture most of the times. You see it when you go somewhere else.
Yes.
And so when you step into a different culture, you're suddenly aware, I'm not in my native home
yes.
turf anymore. Yes. And that's when you start noticing those things.
Absolutely, because, I don't think about breathing. It's natural.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Right.
And I don't think about culture. I have never spent a moment in my life thinking about, now, what would culture do? I just know that inherently.
Right.
It's what all of those closest around me do, how they respond, what they say. The things that they consider important automatically become what I consider important as I'm growing up in that culture. When you go to another country and cross that cultural barrier, one of the very first things that hits you is the differences between where you were raised and where you now are, and that includes everything. That includes, like you said, the cleanliness of the town, the smells, the sounds, the music, the clothes, the colors on the houses.
Right.
And it just leaps out at you. And some of them are closer to our culture, so there's not as many distinctions, but many of them are almost completely different, even in normal things like how you eat, what you eat, and how you eat.
Yeah.
In worship you have a church, but you go inside that church and it's like you're in a different culture, because you are. I mean, the way they worship and praise God is totally different than what is traditionally your understanding of worship. So culture affects everything in our life.
Let me give one more just identification of this as we kind of unpack this. I read a really fascinating article a while back that was talking about cultural differences, and something as basic as this. They said that they traveled in other parts of the world, not European countries only, but like Slavic countries and some second world type countries. And they said that one of the things they noticed was that roads were viewed as shared community space.
Oh yes.
And that you might share, you might be sharing the road with a cow and a donkey and a motorcycle and a Jeep full of 16 people and 5 pedestrians who are utterly jaywalking.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's not that many people have wrecks because everybody expected that to be there.
Absolutely.
Now, here in America, one of our values is individualism.
Sure.
And so we have our own space, and we call it our lane.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to come in my lane, and we have lines so you can see where you're not allowed to go. Because we are so uniquely individualistic, like we focus on individual ownership as the basis of our society.
Yes.
Those kind of things utterly disappear. You don't think about that when you go out and drive, like, I'm going to go out and express the culture of America as individual ownership.
Yes.
You don't think that, but it exists everywhere you go.
Absolutely.
And so in the same way, now, crossing into Hispanic culture, then, what are some things that well, let me get to that question in a minute. What's some things that you'll notice the difference? Let's take one more definition of terms. So if we're talking about taking the gospel then and contextualizing that, let's talk about the gospel. And because the gospel can get kind of tied up with culture too, can it not?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. The gospel basically is the story of God and His interaction with man. Beginning with creation, but basically we think of the gospel as Christ coming to give Himself as a sacrifice for us so that we could have life.
Right.
And so that is what we're trying to present to the world cross-culturally. But there are traces of that gospel message in basically any world culture, because all of us were created in the image of God.
Right.
There is inherent within us a God-shaped piece that is missing. And we go about life from the earliest age to try to find that missing piece that represents God. And that's in every culture. And we don't come to the same conclusions. We don't go through the same rigmarole to get there. But all of us have that same longing in our heart to have some higher being that we worship. So when we talk about ministering cross-culturally, then what we're trying to do is to take this gospel message and wrap it in cultural context so that it has validity in that cultural setting. So not just even validity, but so that it is something that is real and acceptable in that cultural setting. So that is the challenge that is before us, and the key to all of that is what is what John says in chapter 8. He said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do as ministers of the gospel, we're trying to take this gospel and fold it in and blend it into a cultural setting that is culturally acceptable, that is biblically honest, but is personally obtainable for all of us right now. But in all of that, we must remain true to truth. That is the thing that's going to set us free. And so we have a lot of cultural ideas out here that may have a part of truth in it, but just as we're all created in the image of God, we are all marred by the fall and the sinful nature. And what happens is, within the culture, Satan distorts the truth and adds to it and forms some other kind of belief or thought pattern. So as we try to apply that cross-culturally, the thing that we continually have to come back to is truth. In the building trade, we use a term called a benchmark. So if I am going to start building a building, I set up my transit and shoot my grades, and I have them all, so the whole plot's going to be level. But at the end of the day, I have to take down my transit and move it. So unless I put it exactly in the same place tomorrow, my readings are going to be skewed. So I find some place that is stationary and permanent, and I make a mark, an orange dot or something, so I can calibrate my equipment by that benchmark. And it really doesn't matter where I set up tomorrow. If I shoot on that benchmark and I'm 2 inches lower, then all of my measurements have to be 2 inches lower. Or if I'm 1.5 inches higher, then all of the, but I still maintain that level plane to build on, because I have a reference point that is constant.
Yep.
And that's what truth is for us. If we obscure the truth, we shatter the very foundation that we're trying to build on.
Yeah.
We have to come to the truth and build from there. So the first step of cross-cultural ministries is identifying the truth that is within that culture, that we can pull out and connect to and build to. And even in our own culture, it's easy to obscure all of that with a lot of traditions and things like that we have just passed on forever.
Right.
That may be good qualities, that may be in some measure biblically based, but they expand over time. Yeah. We add to them.
Sure.
We increase them. And so it's important personally for me to look at my own culture and go straight to the truth and anchor there. Mm-hmm. And that's what sets me free. Yeah. But it's so much more imperative when you're doing cross-culturally that you have to stay to the truth. It's not the stories of history. It's the truth, the reality, the unchanging Word of God that is relevant to all people of all nations.
Good. So this illustration came to me the other day. I had a extension cord that had gotten left outside in my backyard. My boys had been doing something, I don't know what, and the plug-in end had gotten like stomped into the dirt, right? Then somebody had walked on it and it got shoved down. So in order to pick it up and use it, it would carry the power. I just had to pick it up, and I had to scrape the dirt off the plug, and then I had to bend one of the things back out again, and then shove it into the place so that you could find a way to connect in. So in a crude illustration there's almost a two-step process. There's a little bit like, okay, let's get down to the truth we're trying to communicate, and then let's find the connection points in the culture that we're working with. Give me some examples of this. Let's bring it to a person and a story that the probably will be well known here. Let's go with Jesus. So give me some. How does that look when Christ ministers? I think ultimately he's the first cross-cultural minister.
Yes. And man, the Bible is just absolutely full of it, especially the New Testament. Christ left a perfect, holy, heavenly culture to come to a broken, human, twisted culture. And John chapter 1 says, and the Word was made flesh. That means he was made like us. He became one of us so that we could behold his glory. And so the picture we see is Christ laying aside all that heaven's realities were and coming to earth where men were broken and hurting and lost. And he took human flesh and wrapped it around himself, and he became like us. And in doing that, he subjected himself to our limitations. He got hungry, he got tired, he felt anger, he felt joy, he cried, he laughed. All of those limitations. The Bible even says that he learned obedience, which, it's not like, he's the one that is the one that's over everything. So it's not like he needs to, but he learned obedience from our perspective. What it's going to take to be obedient. So he came here cross-culturally to meet our needs. Now, one writer said that he identified so well with his disciples and the people that he came to save that when Judas betrayed him in the garden, you remember the guards asked, how will we recognize who he is? And he said, you got to get close enough to kiss him, because that's the only way you can distinguish between him and his disciples.
It's not like he had a halo.
Yeah, they didn't come looking for the halo. They didn't come looking for the wings.
Right.
They had to get down and get right into his face before they could recognize that he was the one that they were after. And now, to put that in context, culturally, he claimed to be the King of Kings. He claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
He claimed to be the one that would rule the world. So culturally, there was pressure on him to be what they thought he ought to be. So if he's the King of Kings, you're not to associate at all with those that are dead or those that are sick and diseased, with women, with Samaritans, as in John chapter 4.
Right.
Those were total no-nos. You could not do that. And yet truth, as he's going to apply that cross-culturally, truth insisted, no, you came as a friend of sinners. So you have to communicate your love. You came as the one that could heal the sick and raise the dead. And so a classic example in Matthew, he's been up on the mountain laying out the foundations of his kingdom and telling us the important things, and all of this on the Sermon on the Mount, a classic portion of Scripture that is foundation to our beliefs. But then he comes down off the mountain, and the first thing he does, he says, okay, guys, I told you all these foundations, but now I want to show you what that looks like in real life. So when he comes down off the mountain, the very first miracle that is recorded in Matthew is when Christ is descending from the mount, and there's a leper there at the bottom shouting out, unclean, stay away. I'll contaminate you, which is one of the fears that they had, because if you became unclean, you couldn't even go to the temple to worship.
Right.
And he could have hollered across, said, hey, you're healed. Just go home and don't worry about anything. It's all taken care of.
Right.
But he didn't do that. What he did, the Bible says, he came up and touched him.
Yeah.
He laid his hand physically on the worst problem that they could imagine, because the truth demanded that he declared that he was ruler over all of that. And you see it throughout Scripture. Class barriers, racial barriers, the stigma for women. He just totally ignored that. You remember when he was having his feet washed by what everyone considered an unclean woman. and a woman at that, and said, if you were who you said you were, you would have known that she wasn't someone that should touch you.
Yeah.
But he said, you've said here, you haven't so much as washed my feet. This is what it's all about. This is who I came to save.
Wow.
And when he was really some of his strongest condemnation of the scribes and the Pharisees and this kind of stuff, he said, you don't understand. He said, I came to seek and to save that which was lost. I came to heal the sick. The ones that are well don't need a doctor. You need to study this. You need to understand. That's why I came. Mm-hmm. So what he's doing, he's going across the culture, contrary to the culture, because he has to get to the truth, and that is, I came here to save a broken, hurting world. Mm-hmm. And you see that all the way through Scripture. The 4 Gospels are classic. They're written to the Jews, to the Romans, to the Greeks, right, and to the Christian church. Mm-hmm. And the whole approach in those 4 Gospels are contextualized specifically for those. We talked about him healing the leper and actually touching him. Right. When you're talking to the Greeks, they were into mythology and this godlike figure and a human woman and their offspring who was part God, and so that's how Christ was presented. Mm-hmm. The Son of God and the Son of Man. Yeah. And so what he's doing is contextualizing it and tagging onto something that is a part of their culture, that he can amplify the message of truth through that, and so it impacts that culture in which he's communicating.
So John writes and says, in the beginning was the Word,
yes,
and the Word was with God, and the Word was, yes, God, and then he makes it becomes flesh and makes his dwelling among us, and no one has seen God at any time, but yes, but the only begotten, verse 18, has explained, yes, him.
Yes.
So he's explaining, yes, the Word, and then in Matthew,
so God the Father is involved in this contextualization,
right,
because through the Son he is explaining
himself,
his plan of salvation, right, and who he is and what he demands.
So Matthew says, let me tell you about the son of this one and the son of that one, the son of that one,
yes,
because in the Jewish culture, that was the sports page.
Yes.
I mean, like,
yes,
who yes, you were related, yes, to. Like, yes, it was like you had nothing else. Right?
You look at the genealogies that are presented in the story of Christ, and one goes back to Abraham,
right,
and then one goes clear back to Adam, and John goes back before that. He said before the dawn of, yeah, creation,
right,
the Word was with the Father,
right,
and so but we're talking. He is talking to people that those connections are very meaningful. Right. And what it did, it solidified the truth. Our message is imperative for a lost world. Mm-hmm. But if we don't find some way to bridge that gap and come down to their level so they can understand, we're going to miss it. And Christ, going back to him again, when he was calling the disciples, he walked up on men that were fishing, and immediately he contextualized what he was doing. Right. He said, listen, guys, leave your nets, come follow me, and I will make you what?
Fishers of men.
I will make, yeah, you fishers of men. He's talking to fishermen. They, right, understood that. Mm-hmm. So instantly they had a mental picture of what he wanted them to do. Mm-hmm. When he was walking through the fields and there's farms all around, he's talking about the soil, the good soil, the bad soil, right, the soil by the wayside. Right. He's talking about the good seed and the bad seed, the, yep, wheat and the tares, and how careful you have to be in pulling out the weeds so you don't destroy the good seed, right, as well. Yeah. He's talking about reaping a harvest and looking to the future and the blessing and bounty that comes when you have done all your work properly as a farmer, because that's what they understood. Yeah. And he's saying, that's what I want you to do here on earth. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but he also contextualizes at different levels of intellect.
Okay.
So in John chapter 3, you have Jesus there in Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews, coming to him.
Highly educated.
He is brilliant.
Right.
He is at the top of the food chain as far as command is concerned. I mean, everyone respects him. Everyone looks up to him, and Christ talks to him at a level of his understanding, and they get involved in this. He said, the only way you're going to get to heaven is to be born again. See, Nicodemus wants to know what good thing he can do.
Right.
And he said, it's not in the good thing that you can do. You have to be born again. And Nicodemus says, well, how's that possible?
Right.
I'm an old man. I can't re-enter my mother's womb and be born. He said, no, you're born after the flesh, but you have to be born out after the spirit. And the thing that he never just clearly enunciates word by word by word is the only way you're going to get to heaven is to be born into the kingdom of God in the reality of birth, just as you were born into the world in a physical birth. And Nicodemus was able to understand and process that. We go to the very next chapter, John chapter 4, and he's no longer talking to a ruler and a brilliant man. He's talking to a broken, fallen woman. And I love when I see the passion of Christ. He's in earnest about this presentation of the gospel. It is not just, well, hopefully we have an opportunity. No, he is totally focused on it. And there was something burning within him. He said, you guys go on. I have got to get to Samaria. And the reason he had to get to Samaria was there was a broken, fallen, twisted woman that was going to sneak to the well in the middle of the day when no one was there to get her water. And he said, I've got to be there when she gets there because I have the truth she needs.
Right.
And he didn't talk about being born again, and he didn't talk about all of this stuff at this high level that he had the chapter before with Nicodemus. He started off with something as simple as, can I have a drink?
Right.
And it blew her away because once again, in the presentation of truth, he was ministering cross-culturally. She said, how is it that you speak to me, a woman,
Right.
a woman of Samaria?
Right.
Besides that, we find out she's very much a fallen woman. Right. So, 3 strikes and you're out. And he went out of his way, or actually not out of his way. Everyone else went out of their way to avoid those. But he is focused on ministering cross-culturally to the Samaritans.
Yeah.
And he went directly to be there when she came. And he said, ma'am, you don't understand because I ask you for a drink. And if we drink of this water, we'll thirst again. Oh, but if you would ask of me a drink, I would give you something that would be a well of water and you would never thirst again. Now, she didn't understand it. She said, oh, give me this because I hate coming here to draw because everyone looks at me.
Right.
And he said, no. It's a well springing up inside to everlasting life. Before the end of the story, she understood she understood the truth that he was communicating. And immediately her passion became to talk to others about it. Yeah. And that's the process of this cross-cultural ministry.
He almost, in John 4, it's almost as if Jesus, so in Nicodemus' conversation, John 3, he kind of gets in the weeds, right?
Yes.
Like we're diving deep, we're going into this born again,
Yes.
And then in John 4, it's like he avoids religious controversy.
Oh, yes.
There was significant religious division between those two cultures. The Jews say we got to worship here. The Samaritans say we got to worship here.
And she brings it in.
She brought it up, and he dodges the bullet.
He's around it. And that is so important in cross-cultural ministry because I'm looking for similarities that I can connect to, where I can anchor truth to it.
Right.
And their first response is to throw all the differences, the peripheral things that are insignificant, and throw those at me. And working in Mexico, obviously, you're talking Protestantism and Catholicism.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's instant things like that. Even within our own culture, if I'm talking about being filled with the Spirit, and then I go to a Trinity Pentecostal, and that means something entirely different.
Right.
I go to an Apostolic, and they say, I had a friend say, "Bye, may your gods be with you," because I believe in the Trinity. See? and so even in our own culture, we have those differences, and what happens is that becomes our defense, because my culture says this.
Yeah.
And that's what I believe. So I defend myself culturally.
This is an interesting point. I just want to highlight this to anybody that may be watching. It is the natural thing, it seems to me, to highlight those differences.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing that does that, the reason it does that is because American population and our political system and all that is built on differentiation. It's built on segmenting the population and finding your core constituency.
Sure.
So you have to energize the core constituency by making them afraid of something, and so we highlight these cultural differences and point out, and so it gets into all this immigration stuff and things like that. And I'm not here to argue about any of that. What I would say is to anybody that's watching is be careful of that, and be careful what you put on Facebook, and be careful what you do, because you can push away, you can shove people, and they feel shoved. So you are, in a certain sense, if you do that, you're doing what Jesus didn't do. And that is engaging on a particular point of division between two cultures.
Yes.
I have people in my church that went and protested Donald Trump when he was in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Okay, because they are involved in immigration, like it's personal to them. They know people that are personal friends or family that are illegal, and they went and protested him when he was coming through Oklahoma and stuff.
Yes.
Because. And so at that point, I have choices about what I'm going to do.
Yes.
I have a choice, like if I'm going to accept this challenge that this culture throws out toward me, and make that an argument. And Jesus completely dodges that argument and goes around it so he could talk about the gospel. So please just take that for what it's worth. Okay.
Yes. Well, and that's a very important point. I personally work with bus kids, the majority of whom. Their families are illegal. I deal, 2 Sundays ago, I had a boy in my Sunday school class, and he had 2 younger sisters. They were really torn up. They're all legal because they were born in the United States, but both parents are here without papers, and the dad had been in trouble 2 or 3 times, and he had gotten serious trouble. He was deported. And so here I am trying to comfort three children that they're brokenhearted, they're feeling that loss, but there again, I'm not called to take a political stand. I have my own ideas. And that would have to be a different...
Sure, yeah.
It's a different thing.
It's a different video.
But the thing about it is, what you gave as an example here within your church, what I do on a regular basis, you see, that's not my focus. I totally bypass that. I give the comfort, because the truth of the matter is, I'm here to show them that when they're broken and when they're hurting, they have a friend in Jesus that will wrap them up in love, and I'm his arms. So the first arms that wrap them up are mine.
Yeah.
And I wrapped them up, and I prayed for them, and I talked to them, and I was able to connect with them, and we didn't even get into whether that was right or wrong or fair or not fair, because there is no one answer that satisfies everybody.
Right.
But the truth is there, and that's what we have to tag on.
In that moment, it seems to me that you incarnated, you infleshed the gospel into that cultural difference, and you leaped the barrier at that moment, because Jesus did that first. God could have contextualized that just by writing something. Write it on a piece of rock, drop it out of the sky, and now you have the contextualized gospel explained in fisherman terms. But he did more than that. He infleshed himself into that culture first, and then communicates it from that vantage point. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And oh, you get me cranked up here. When the scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees looked at humanity, they saw the walls of restriction.
Yeah.
All right? And anyone trying to climb over that wall, we knocked off. All right? Because there was only one way you had to get through, and if you didn't come that way, then, but their focus was on the differences and maintaining those differences. When Christ came, he never saw the differences. Never. He was looking at the humanity. He was looking at the hurt. He was looking at the needs. And he walked right over top all of those objections, not because he was disregarding them, although he was to a certain degree, and he made that obvious.
Right.
But he was walking over top of it because the focus of everything he was doing was getting down to heal the hurts and mend the brokenness of fallen man. And when we go into cross-cultural ministries, if we never get to the point where we can step over the cultural barriers and boundaries and even laws and that kind of thing. I'm a law-abiding citizen,
right.
but that is not the focus of my ministry. I had someone that is a friend really take me to task because I would deign to work with illegals. Mm-hmm. And I said, God didn't call me to be a border patrol. He called me to be a missionary.
Right.
And God brought them to me.
Yeah.
I didn't even have to cross the river. They're on my side. Yeah. They're right here. And that's my focus. That's right. What I am called to do. Right. How in the world do I walk away because they don't have a piece of paper? Do I think they need a piece of paper? Sure I do. Yeah. Because I believe the Bible teaches us that we're to obey and respect the laws of man. But, that disappears because when your focus is on the ministry of the gospel and the presentation of truth and meeting the needs of the hurting, that's what you see, that's what you focus on, and that's what makes people even put their own life in jeopardy to reach, right. To do without themselves so that they can supply. Yeah. And we're the hands and the feet of Jesus. We're sure. The mouth of Jesus, the face right. They see. When they see Jesus, I hope they recognize him.
Yeah.
Because they saw his reflection in my face.
Yeah. So we've gone pretty philosophical here for a while, and this is why I love talking to him about this because the heartbeat is there. We've gone pretty philosophical for the first half hour here, so let's bring this down to some stories. Let's bring this to some things that you've observed. I should put this in context. I just realized I don't think I've mentioned this specifically, but Steve lives 4 miles from Mexico in the Rio Grande Valley, and actually runs, you mentioned some kids in your Sunday school class, he runs a bus or helps run a bus route that picks up kids who are illegal that live in shacks on the border of the Rio Grande, on the American side of the border of the Rio Grande River. When the border patrol comes down there, they jump in the water. They
dive in the water, swim across the river, sit on the other bank and watch until the border patrol leaves, and then they jump in the water and swim home.
So just to put this in context, it's not like this is pie in the sky. This is real stuff down by where the border is. So there's a lot of stories and things that I'm sure that you have that you've experienced in your time in Mexico and things like that. What surprised you in trying to move into that culture, and the differences, and trying to get to a place of being able to enflesh the gospel into that culture? What were some things that shocked you, surprised you? What were some hard adjustments? What would be interesting to know in that way?
Well, anywhere you go in the world, they have their own things. I was in the Philippines teaching, and I told a personal story that was sad, and the congregation cracked up laughing. and I was taken aback. I'm like, I didn't think that was funny. It doesn't feel funny to me, And Brother Forto, who was interpreting in the Ifugao, he said, "Oh, brother," he said, "let me explain." He said, "When we're sharing your sorrow, we laugh." Well, that is totally
backwards
from us, because if you laugh when I'm hurting, I'm gonna punch you in the nose in our society. Yeah. And then it's everywhere in between. You go to a Muslim culture, and depending on the sect of the Muslim world, their women are dressed from head to toe with only little slits on the eyes, and in one specific sect of that, they even wear a veil over their eyes when they're out in public.
Right.
But you go up to the Eskimos above the Arctic Circle, and they have a tradition that if someone really trusts you as a friend, the way they seal that is, I would offer you my wife for the night.
Wow. Yeah.
Because that is the ultimate seal. That is my greatest treasure, and I give it to you. And for me, and for her, and for you, that is honor.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And we don't go to either one of those extremes.
Right.
So we're somewhere here in the middle, where we believe in modesty, but we believe in moral purity and things like that.
Right.
So and you don't dare get into all the because then whose culture are you going to set these guidelines by?
Sure.
But when my specific area of work is with the Latin culture, and there's just a lot of differences that right at first are hard to get over. We talk about Latin time,
right.
where
Yeah.
I had come out of 18 years in a job where my whole world was dictated by a clock. Mm-hmm. And what that clock said told me everything I needed to know.
School teacher. You were a school teacher.
I was a school teacher.
Right.
I was an associate pastor, youth pastor.
Right.
I did all kind. Every other week I had a service at a retirement center. I would run from daylight to dark, and I would get home and eat and immediately go to studying for my next, and I'd put that away and go preach somewhere and come back, and I'd study with my kids and every segment of my day was scheduled.
Yeah.
And I lived by the clock.
Yeah.
And I get to Mexico, and the majority of those people don't even have a clock in their house.
Yeah.
And I struggled with it. I mean, I really struggled with it. Mm-hmm. And to me, we would set a time for me to meet someone, and half hour, 45 minutes late, of all things, they would show up and act like nothing was wrong. Mm-hmm. And by that time, I'm steamed. I'm saying, you're not respecting me. You're wasting my time. I was here on time. I have sat here for 45 minutes, and then you finally show up and act like nothing's wrong. And so I remember going to our national president, and I said, look, this really bothers me. I said, I know that I am too controlled by the clock, but that's the only way I kept my head above water for years, because I was so busy. But I need you to understand. And he sort of smiled, and he said, you remember when we took that trip up in the mountains? And I said, yeah. He said, up there, if you say 2 o'clock, they know that 2 o'clock, give or take a half hour either direction, is about when the shadow of the tree falls across that stone out in front of the house right at this angle.
Depending on season.
Yeah.
Right.
And So they don't even have a clock to look at.
Right.
If they're, what time is it? They go out and look at the sun and look at it. Oh yeah, it's about time. So then they start heading there.
Right.
But you know, the degrees of that shadow are constantly changing, and you know,
Yeah.
and so I said, okay, well, let me give you a specific thing. We were supposed to take part in in a wedding.
Okay.
And they said the wedding was going to start at 6 o'clock. And I showed up 10 minutes early, and obviously no one was there, except for these two ladies that were just getting ready to start decorating the church. And I'm like, man, you ladies are going to have to hurry. And they were just laughing and talking and whatever. And they didn't even start decorating the church until it was time. And a half hour later, there was no one there.
Yeah.
Except my family and I.
Yeah.
And these two ladies that were continuing, you know, and it went on and on. The bride was an hour and a half late.
Yeah.
and I said, what about that? And he said, they give this little shrug in Latin. He said, it's her wedding. When she wants it to begin, let it begin.
That's when it begins.
and the same thing happened in the quinceañera, which is the 15th birthday celebration of a girl when she officially lays aside her childhood and becomes a woman.
Right.
And I said I had to speak at a quinceañera, and there was 400 people there.
Yeah.
They had a full sit down meal afterwards.
Yeah.
And people kept coming in. I mean, there was like 25 people that came in 5 minutes before we finished the service.
Right.
And then we got to the reception hall, or the salon, where they had rented for the celebration afterwards.
Right.
And half the people there I had never seen before. They hadn't been at the service.
Yeah.
They just showed up for the party. And I'm a little offended for the family, you know. I mean, how is that fair? And so it was his family.
Yeah.
I mean, it was his daughter that it was her quinceañera. So I said, tell me about that. And I said, did it bother you that people showed up so late? He said, well, no. And I said, what about those that were just showed up at the party? Did that? He said, no, that didn't bother me at all. And I keep asking questions, and he laid his hand on my arm and he sort of smiled. He said, here's what you from the United States don't understand. It's our celebration. We've invited them to come. They have their own schedule. They have their own families. They have their own responsibilities. For them to come, they honor us. I mean, they took of their own valuable time to come just to celebrate my daughter's birthday. And he said, then I'm going to feel bad at them because they didn't show up at some exact moment? Well, they took off work early and walked for an hour. And he gave me the name of someone that I knew that was there, and one of the ones that sort of offended me because he came in so late. He said he took off an hour early and cleaned up, and he walked for an hour to get here.
Yeah.
And well, then I'm feeling a little embarrassed myself because I made this big deal out of nothing, you know. And I said, so okay, tell me, is there any point where it's too late to come? And he sort of grinned and he said, well, he said, you probably ought to be there by the time we cut the cake. And I said, okay. I'm thinking, yes, I've nailed this down. I said, so when do you cut the cake? And he just grinned great big. He said, we cut the cake the very last thing that we do. But I never forgot it because he said, you're focused on a clock.
Yeah.
He said, we're focused on a relationship. He didn't say it in so many words.
Okay, right.
But we're focused on a relationship. They have honored me, my daughter, my whole family by taking time out and going to the expense and rearranging of everything just to be there. Who cares when they get there?
Right.
They still have honored us by coming.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
Now, let me flip to an illustration of spiritual things.
Okay.
I went to a Catholic church, and a big Catholic church. And as I had been inside, I came out, and here came a grandmother crawling up a gravel drive. She was in her 80s. Her legs were swollen, and she had a boy on either side that was holding on to her. And I found out later that they were her grandsons. But she was literally, she had crawled for so many blocks, she was literally leaving a trail of blood on top of the gravel as she crawled toward the church, looking up and doing her Hail Marys and this kind of thing. And she crawled all the way in and stopped at the basin of holy water, and she put it on and prayed and gave an offering. There were tracks of blood on the floor. And I stopped her and I said, "Ma'am, I'm not from here. I'm from the United States. Can you explain to me why you make this pilgrimage?" And she looked up at the statue of the Blessed Virgin, and she cried and crossed herself and kissed her fingers, and she said, "I want to go to heaven so bad." And she said, "I'll do anything to get his attention so he understands that I want to go." Well, that's the religious teaching that I was dealing with. And I was able to say, "Oh, ma'am," I said, "you already have his attention. He loved you enough that he left heaven and came here to show you how to, and he died for you. He knows that you want, and he has already made all the provision. You have to put your faith and trust in him and confess your sins and be forgiven, and then he'll take you to heaven." So that bridge, that chasm, here is a devout, religious person that is doing everything that she can to try to earn her way into heaven. So I don't have to tell her that about Jesus and about him dying on the cross. Mm-hmm. In her mind, he's still on the cross. Right. Every symbol inside that church had him on a cross, or they had a big plexiglass casket of him in that casket, and they had slots on the top, and they had almost covered his body with offerings that they would put in there. But it was always a dead Christ.
Right.
All right. So those are the things that you work with. Now there's an element of truth there.
Sure.
She knew that Christ was her hope of heaven. Mm-hmm. But she was confused how to get there. Right. And so she's praying to the Blessed Virgin and abusing her body in an effort to convince God that she was serious enough to go to heaven. Yeah. So I step into that kind of cultural setting, and I'm trying to latch on to the truth that she knows, mm-hmm. but take her to the scripture of truth, mm-hmm. that shows her that, yes, part of that is true, but here is the answer. Yeah. And that's not always easy to do.
Right.
And another thing you have to understand in cross-cultural ministry, if that lady would get saved today, there would be certain elements that are so ingrained in her life that for the rest of her life she would continue to participate. When she walked by the Catholic Church, she would stop and cross herself and do a kiss to the Virgin Mary, right. Because from the time she could walk until 80-some years old, that had been a part of her life. Now, do I agree with that? No.
Understand.
Do I condemn that? No.
Right.
Because part of what you have to understand in cross-cultural things, the longer they live in a personal relationship to Jesus, the more those things will fall off. Mm-hmm. But some things may never change.
Right. It's not like you have to convince them that the Blessed Virgin is unblessed. Or,
no,
you're not trying to run that down.
No, because the Bible elevates her.
Right.
You know, and yet
blessed are you among women is still true, right?
Yeah, she was honored above all other women,
right,
as the mother of Christ.
Right.
Now she has absolutely nothing,
no saving power,
to do with me getting to heaven.
Right.
Nothing. Yeah. And that's the difference. But 97% of the population of Mexico is Roman Catholic.
Yeah.
So, that's what you're up against. Now, let me give you one more example of what I ran into.
Right.
Our churches were made of people that had been genuinely saved, that had come out of the Catholic Church. All right? But in their attempt to be what they ought to be, they drew a line of demarcation, and everything on one side was Catholic and everything on the other side was Christian. Well, technically, Catholicism is a Christian religion because it's based on Christ. All right? But where they draw the line is Catholic and non-Catholic. So there's a little mountain church, 201, the 201 mile marker, down in southern Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca. We had a church there. The pastor had died, and we had not found someone to replace him. And so the Key family was we worshipped in a building on their property, and so they were chairing the services and all of this. And one day a man came through and talked to them about the Bible, and they asked him, "Are you Catholic?" He said, "No." And they said, "Well, would you preach for us on Sunday?" Well, that happened to be the Sunday. Well, it was 2 Sundays after that. He had been preaching there for 3 weeks, and they liked him. They said, "Well, would you?" He said, "Yeah, I can just work as pastor." Well, I came 3 weeks later, and this guy got up to speak, and I realized that he was Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh, what are we doing here? What?"
Right.
And so later, he had gone home, and I was fellowshipping with the pastor and his wife, and I said, "Hermano," or brother, I said, "How are things going in the church?" And I said, "This man that was preaching, where did he come?" "Well, he just came by one day and was talking about the Bible and this, and he told me that he was a preacher, and so I invited him to preach." And I said, "Yeah, but he's he's Jehovah's Witness."
Testigo.
Yeah. And I said, "Boy, they don't believe like we believe, and they teach things that are contrary to Scripture in several areas." And I were able to show him some of those, and he looked at me and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir." He said, "But I didn't know." He said, "Now I made sure they weren't Catholic."
Right.
And so even those that are saved, they realize God has pulled them out of Catholicism, but then it's like anyone that's not Catholic, that's the great sin. Anyone that's not Catholic is okay. Right. And so not only do you have to bring them to the truth, but you have to disciple them and train them in the truth, and show how that applies, and the fact that it's not just the sin that God pulled you out of that you have to avoid, but you have to live by these principles. So it is an ongoing, far-reaching thing. Yeah. But those are just some very simple, everyday things that are even somewhat nonsensical at times, and yet in my work it cuts to the heart of the things that you're trying to do, because you're overcoming a lot of religious teachings that really are opposed to the Word. Yeah. And well, we won't get into that.
Series of barriers that you have to just be mindful of. So many more things you have to clear.
Yes.
You have to jump over this, jump over that, jump over that, dodge this problem and dodge this issue. A lot more things. Now, if you were to go, and this is just a matter of strict opinion. Obviously, there's no right, wrong answer on this one. It's if you were to go and start serving, let's just say you're one of these guys. You're going to go to a city, and you're going to be pastoring there, and you want to connect. You have, let's say, a church that's already in existence, but you want to connect with Hispanic people.
Yeah.
You want to start making inroads into that culture, because there is a subculture there that happens on. There's a whole ton of things you get into about like their saving face and things that where they'll almost we would almost say lie to you in order to preserve the relationship in their mind, and almost almost gossip, we would almost call it that, because rather than come confront you about something, they would go to someone else and ask them to go and talk to you, these kind of things, because it makes more sense for them to save face for themselves. Another way that saving face thing brings itself out is they will have a brightly painted house that may not be very clean or very well kept, but their car will be amazing. They'll be like super clean. The car washes in Oklahoma City, the car washes in Oklahoma City stay in business because of Hispanic people. Okay, they'll change clothes before they go to the grocery store, because in the public face is, I'm doing well, regardless of how poorly things may be going. I'm going to be okay.
I knew a lady that worked as a cleaning lady. She would dress in her Sunday clothes and ride the bus, and she would take her work clothes in a bag, and she would get there, she would change into her work clothes, work all day, and then clean up, a little spit polish, and then she'd change back into her Sunday clothes and ride the bus back. You don't ever go to Walmart without socks and shoes on your kid, because that looks bad on you. Like you can't provide. The other about, avoiding any kind of thing, even in their language, you don't say that you broke it or whatever. Everyone can know who did it, and they say that it threw itself on the floor and broke. It did it, not me, not you.
Take myself out of this.
So it's objective, so no one is offended. And you'll talk all the way around 3 blocks to get to the core of the subject, because they don't want to approach you directly and offend you. So you're talking and talking and talking, and you know that there's some topic or motive to this whole thing, and you can't figure it out, and finally half hour later it's like, oh, that's what they were wanting to talk to me about.
So we just added a board member at our church who's Hispanic. His background now he's highly Americanized in the sense that he's been in the States for years, but still when you go to talk to him about things, you still if it wouldn't be too difficult, could you maybe think about and talk to your wife and consider, maybe pray about possibly joining the church board and being part of that and coming to our meetings? We would be so honored to have you. But we would love it if you would.
Leave it up to him to make that.
And it's not like we'd like to put you on the church board. It's not so. That's a very American kind of bull in a china shop, direct, straight to the issue. You really can't do it with Hispanic culture.
And they never get beyond that. My wife was raised in Guatemala and Honduras. Until I started language training, I didn't realize some things and understand some things about my wife. She gives me all the hints in the world so I can deduct what she wants me to know.
Right.
And I'm saying there, look, just tell me. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. Tell me. Tell me just straight up. And yet she comes in the back door, and it's because of that Latin influence when she was little.
Yeah.
You don't do that, because that is offensive, and if you offend them, you've lost them.
Yeah. So if you were to go into a city and say, I want to start making some inroads into the Hispanic culture, I want to make some connections, I want to start some relationships, what would that look like? What are some things you would do?
Oh man, I would find
first.
I would find where they hang out and the best place to eat, like a taco shop.
Okay.
And I would start showing up there.
Okay.
And I would let them get accustomed to seeing me. I would sit and talk. I would joke around. I would let them get comfortable with me, and that is the foundation of any ministry you'll do. Infleshing
yourself
into
that culture.
You have to engage them at that level, and as the trust begins to build, you can invite them to your church service, and they possibly, once you've reached a certain level, will show up when you know you're getting some places where they invite you to their kid's birthday party. And whatever you do, if they invite you, if you have to move heaven and earth, go.
Okay. Yep.
Because you are, once again, it goes back, you have honored me by coming.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
In Mexico, if you reach another level, they not only would invite you, but they would give you the opportunity to help share the cost of it.
Right.
Because the family and friends I'll pay for the cake, I'll pay for the music, I'll pay for the balloons.
Right. Right.
But it is.
So
it is
if
that,
it costs you something, it's almost like you've reached another level of intimacy.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're considered one of the close circle of family and friends, because they take advantage of that? Oh, you bet you they will.
Yeah. Because
you're the one with the money.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you have to do that all the time, but it is indicative that they have reached a level of trust and connection with you that they feel like, oh, you're real, you're genuine, you love me, you're willing to participate in my life, and they're going to reach out to you. So as they reach out to you, you respond, and they're going to do that before you reach out to them and they respond.
Yeah. Okay.
They may do it very perfunctory one time or so, but that is, engage them. They love to talk. They love to laugh. You say, well, I don't know much Spanish. Oh, that's all the better, because they love to laugh at you. But they laugh at each other. I mean, their sense of enjoyment is humiliating someone else, but then turning right around and giving them the opportunity to humiliate them. Yeah. Their games. Yeah. I mean, they just embarrass one another,
right,
and roll on the ground laughing. But then they get right back up and put themselves into where they have to do it, and they know what's coming.
Yeah.
Now they won't come to you directly because they don't want to embarrass or humiliate you or put you on the spot. But in a casual, joking setting, they do it. But yeah, get in there and try to talk some Spanish, and they'll laugh, and then they'll tell you, say, okay, you're going to have to teach me. Tell me how I say that real. And they'll have you say it, and they'll laugh again. But that is the camaraderie. And you watch guys work together. They rag each other all the time. And that is the way it works,
You're inside the circle when that's happening, yeah. So you would hang out with, we try to find where they are and just inflesh yourself into that world for a period of time, and try to find maybe kind of the person of peace sort of
absolutely.
thing.
Absolutely. And what happens is, if you ever get in that inner circle, then you have access to everyone else in that circle. So you make friends with Juan, and when Juan invites you into his family to a party, suddenly Juanita and Carlos and all these other families, they're all saying, hey, I don't know him, but he's Juan's friend.
Right.
And so they accept you too.
Yeah.
And through one connection, if you have a rally day and you tell Juan, I really, really, really want you to bring as much as your family as you can, because this is a special day and you're my friends and I want everyone to know you're my friends, they can fill your church.
Yeah.
Just from one family, I promise.
Yeah.
They'll just blow you away. There'll be people coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
Now, you may never see them again, some of them, but that's the kind of thing it is. Mm-hmm. And there is that inner connection and dependency, and where they reach out to do things for each other and that kind of thing.
That gets back to that individualism. Yeah. As Americans, we have our own schedule. It's like our time, my business, my to-do list, my checklist,
and my
schedule,
and
or my everything, my privacy fence. But we almost pride ourselves in saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't make it. Had plans already." Yeah. And whereas once you're in, then you have all these connections that you can call on, and that's a good thing to remember. So, a couple of final notes as we wrap it up. If you're going to do this kind of stuff, understand there will be a lot of uncomfortable moments.
Oh, yeah.
Guarantee you, 100% for sure, there will be a lot of uncomfortable moments. You will go to birthday parties and there'll be alcohol there.
Oh yeah.
I guarantee you. that it's very religious people, at least in the Catholic sense, and they're all holding a bottle.
And they'll offer it to you.
And you'll be going to, can you get you a drink, and there's coolers, and and you got to dig around and pick the bottle of water or whatever is there. So if that's the case, we got some visitors here. Give me 2 minutes. You come on through. It's all right. We're just finishing up a little interview for my thing. So that's right. Come on through. Hello. Nice to meet you all.
We could introduce them.
Yeah, we could. Bring them on camera. So there will be a lot of uncomfortable moments if you do that. If you do this kind of ministry, but I think when that happens, here's what I feel like my closing thing for you is this. I think when that happens, you're feeling just a little bit of what Christ felt.
Yes.
When he came and got uncomfortable for you.
Yes.
You want to talk about the value gaps and the practice gaps and the misunderstanding gaps. I think you're feeling a little of that. And so I think that when you do that, and when you feel that discomfort, and when it's not, it's awkward, and you're not even sure whether they really, was that for real, or did they really accept me? I don't even know. I don't even do. And sometimes there will be misunderstandings. Somebody will push you away, and these kind of things happen. Don't be surprised, and don't quit, and just let it wash over you as an understanding and an identification with your Savior, because that's who He is for you.
Yes.
And as that, I hope this is an encouraging conversation for you, Steve. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah. Let me wrap with one other thing. Don't go in to your ministry looking for the differences. They're going to be evident, but you cannot capitalize on that and focus on that. You're looking in cross-cultural ministries, you're looking for somewhere to connect, all right? Some way to apply the truth in a form that they will do. Now, you have to avoid syncretizing. It's not adding God as another option on a smorgasbord.
Right.
Because that's not being true to truth. Because He is the way, the truth, the life. So you're not trying to offer Him as another option. You build on any connecting point that is in line with truth, but then you bring them back to truth. Remember, truth is what sets them free. Nothing that you and I can say will do that. It has to be the truth. So we look for that truth. We do not try to syncretize it. We do not obscuritize it, make it so unrecognizable that you can't even find it. The Amish have done that. Okay, so this outward life covers up a multitude of sins, and you cannot see the morality or the truth running through their life. What you see is this outward garb, because it's become so obscure. But you have to guard the truth with your life, because it's the only thing that'll set them free. Nothing in your church will do it. Nothing in your own personal interaction with them will do it. The only thing that will break the power of sin and the chains of sin is truth. So you have to bring them to the truth, and you build on that truth. Once you get in, once you begin to work with them, once Juan becomes your friend, you have a friend for life. That person will die for you, because you have gained their respect and trust. You have brought them to the truth. God has transformed their life, and they become a lifelong friend. And that's what it's all about.
It is.
You know.
It is. Thank you for taking this hour. I appreciate it. And thanks very much. If you have further questions and things, I'm no expert in this area, but I would be happy to reach out to Hispanic ministry contacts that I have in these kind of things. And if you have questions, talk to me on the Marco Polo coaching group. Talk to me via text or email, and get in touch. And I'll be happy to try to put you in touch with somebody who you can converse with more directly about questions you might have about Hispanic ministry in your context. Thanks for taking the time. God bless you. Thank you for what you do. Keep reaching out.